My job is to talk about the contributions of Cedar Mesa archaeology to southwestern archaeology of Pueblo 2 and 3 periods. This was a pretty clean document yesterday afternoon, but it's subsequently been overlaid with many layers of tiny pencil edits and so forth. So I hope that my ancient brain and my reading glasses are sufficient to decipher this particular palimpsest. So here we go. Primarily focused here on Cedar Mesa proper, the upland southland natural bridges, and bisected north-south by State Highway 261. The evidence we're talking about here is from the 1970 Cedar Mesa project surveys that RG has just described, plus later surveys by Winston Hurst, Owen Severance, and Jonathan Till. And since 2009, Mattson and I and Natalie Clark have done additional work, survey work on Cedar Mesa. I'll also make some reference to the archaeology of the Comb Wash, Comb Ridge area just to the east of the Mesa proper, as investigated by Hurst, Kathy Cameron, Jonathan Till, and others. The first I want to try to fit in 4 topics here. First, I'll briefly discuss Pueblo 2 and 3 settlement patterns and population. Between about 1060 and 1270, the average momentary population, that is at any one time, was 1,000. We estimate about 1,000 to 1,500 in our 800 square kilometer study area, 1 to 2 people per square kilometer. The predominant mode of subsistence was dry farming above about 1,500 feet. Runoff farming could also be practiced and was practiced in some of the canyons and in a few places on the mesa top, as RG has mentioned. But these represent probably less than 15%, maybe substantially less than 15% of the available arable soil. So when there was enough rainfall, the dry farming niche was big. Of course, when there wasn't, people tended to bail out. Habitations were primarily single households, rarely multiple households, located close to fields. Not a lot of investment in architecture. Many of these sites are pretty slim in terms of the amount of structural investment. This was a low investment, flexible pattern that allowed people to be mobile within a territory occupied by a loosely structured dispersed community, and to readily move away from the area entirely if local or regional environmental, demographic, or social conditions required it. Except for a few great houses, discussed shortly, settlement aggregation was very low throughout, and we don't see the large Pueblo 3 canyon head aggregations found in the central Mesa Verde area just to the east of Comb Ridge and on east from there. If you're familiar with Mark Varian's book, Sedentism and Social Mobility in a Social Landscape, based on the central Mesa Verde area, we have kind of a low-tech or a low-investment version of the same settlement principles that allow for this kind of adaptive and social flexibility. Okay, second topic, if I can find it. Occupation of Cedar Mesa was quite episodic, as RG has already indicated. This was likely a response to minor climatic variations affecting rainfall farming, but probably more importantly, the changes in population and community organization, especially degree of aggregation in more populous parts of the Four Corners area. Hence, Cedar Mesa is to some extent a barometer of what was going on in areas to the east, dominated by the Mesa Verde tradition, and at times by the Kayenta tradition to the south and southwest. Hurst's recent surveys in Comb Wash show that occupation is more continuous there, just to the east of the Cedar Mesa Highland, but the same general population trends are present there, but you don't have the sort of extreme episodic character that we see on the mesa itself. The BM Master 3 occupation of Cedar Mesa ends in the early 700s, after which there is a long hiatus in Pueblo 1 and early Pueblo 2. In Comb Wash, there's a significant late Pueblo 1 occupation and some early Pueblo 2 occupation, and some of this extends onto the easternmost flanks of Cedar Mesa. If that site that RG talked about, if I looked at it again, I might well classify that as early Pueblo 1 to the late Master 2, but it's on the edge there. So there's some of that. Occupation during this interval also does not extend west. Pueblo 1, early Pueblo 2, does not extend west into the Red Rock Plateau and the Glen Canyon area, indicating that the sort of western edge of Pueblo 1, early Pueblo 2, and the northern San Juan really pretty much stops at Col Blanche. Cedar Mesa sees a strong reoccupation in late Pueblo 2 in the mid-1000s, initially with predominantly Mesa Verde tradition pottery, but with varying amounts of Canada-types. This transitions by about 1100 to a predominance of Canada pottery in a number of sites, but still with some Mesa Verde types. Owen Severance argues that we have the sequence reversed, that the initial reoccupation was from the Canada area, but so far we're sticking to our guns on our original sequencing derived from our seriation. The Canada influence, in my opinion, the Canada influence we see at the very end of the 1000s, early 1100s, is part of a population surge out of the Canada area north of the San Juan. We see this strongly in the Red Rock Plateau to the west, and it extends much further northwest and north to the Coombs site of Boulder, Utah, and other areas well north of Cedar Mesa. We also think we can detect a brief depopulation or very low population in the mid-1100s, coincident with a severe mid-1100s drought, regional drought. Population picks up again in P3 in the late 1100s and reaches a peak probably in the 1230s and 1240s with ceramics strongly dominated by Mesa Verde types. In the 1200s, there was also a strong trend of building small cliff dwellings in the canyons, almost certainly as a response to the conflict that was widespread in the Four Corners area at the time. However, there appears to have been a continuing substantial population on the mesa top with sites located close to dry farm fields. Treating dates assembled by our earlier Cedar Mesa project and more recently by Tom Wines, his terrific dating project in Natural Bridges and on Cedar Mesa, indicate that building began to taper off in the 1240s in Natural Bridges and in the 1250s on Cedar Mesa, and essentially ceased in the 1260s, except for Moon House, which has a last date at 1268. The implication is that most people had bailed out of Cedar Mesa well before the onset of the Great Drought of 1276 and 1299, which is often credited with pushing people out of areas like this. Some of them probably joined the large, more defensible villages that were aggregating in the central Mesa Verde area to the east, even as some of those people were beginning to migrate out of the area. And some Cedar Mesa inhabitants may have gone directly to Pueblo settlement areas to the south and southeast themselves. Third topic, Chacoan influence. We have a couple of small Chacoan great houses on Cedar Mesa. The et al. Site and the Owen site. They've been known for a while. The et al. Site was originally documented by Linnell Shaw when she was a Grand Gulch Ranger in the 70s, and we sort of rediscovered it in the early 80s, and it was recognized as a possible, probable Chacoan big bump, at least relatively speaking, by Steve Lexon on a Crow Canyon trip in the mid-1980s, then mapped by Bruce Bradley and Al Hayes a little later, hence the name, by Al Hayes and others, hence the name et al. So the Owen site, another one, farther north that was first recognized by Owen Severance. These date to the very end of the 1000s and early 1100s. Initial building reflecting emulation of Chacoan architectural styles at these buildings that surely served as community centers. We mapped these, RG and I mapped, and Natalie Clark and I mapped these in 2009, and Natalie did an intensive block survey around the et al. Site in 2011, and then we went back and did some, and showed that some of our possible great kivas weren't all that great in 2012. The main feature of these two sites is they're architecturally, they're not very big by regional standards, but they contrast in a relative sense quite ostentatiously with the very humble habitations that where the regular people lived throughout the mesa. Over in the Comb Wash area, Hurst and Cameron have documented and done some excavations at a nucleated settlement pattern around the Comb Wash Great House, which appears not to have been constructed until Pueblo 3 times. So this pattern continues there. And on Cedar Mesa proper, the et al. Site also continued to be and continue to have some remodeling in Pueblo 3 times in the 1200s and continue to serve as a center at that time, although the Owen site did not continue into Pueblo 3. Fourth final topic, Pueblo 3 cultural landscapes. People, I think it's universal that people build cultural memories and cultural beliefs into the landscape. Particularly in pre-literate times, it's a kind of physical hard drive where names and stories can be attached to the natural features of the landscape. And eventually people began to build places, build things, and that also become features of the natural of the cultural landscape. So we began to see this. The built part of it begins to be obvious enough for even archaeologists to recognize, often with help from some present-day Pueblo people. Some of these, one of the most outstanding parts of this is the roads in the area. The journals of the Hole in the Rock Pioneers record some possible trails or roads on Cedar Mesa. And over 100 years ago, the founder of Blanding, Albert Lyman, published an article documenting shallow linear swales in southeast Utah that he identified as roads. In recent decades, Winston Hurst, who happens to be Albert Lyman's great nephew, Owen Severance and Jonathan Till have documented a number of road traces in southeast Utah, including in Comb Wash and on Cedar Mesa. These are associated with both Chaco-style Pueblo II and later Pueblo III great houses, but some of them appear to have broader associations and functions in representing relationships among settlements and with natural features. Hurst and Till have also documented a number of probable shrine features, a variety of shrine features, and in our recent surveys on Cedar Mesa, Matson, Clark, and I have also begun to document such features that were not detected or recognized in the sampling-based surveys in the 1970s. In any case, I think that this is a continuing interest, really a developing interest in southwestern archaeology, and I think that Cedar Mesa has contributed significantly to that and will continue to do so in the future. So thank you.